Hey there, neighbors. You know, there's a genre of television show that I love more than any other, and fortunately for me, they've been made into video games many, many times. Ever since I was a kid, seeing the bright lights and the crazy set designs, I wanted to be on TV under the almighty pressure of trying to keep my wits about me when there's thousands of dollars at stake. And video games let me experience that, to a degree. So for 500 cyber dollars, what are we going to be talking about today? Game shows!
What do you remember most about the games you used to play? Past the shorts are here to remind you of back in the day. PC or console, does not matter what you choose. Memories will be made even if you win or lose. Go save file. Now we never have a save file. What's your favorite memory? Save file. Aaron, Stevie, Warning to save file. That's what shorts brings us to you. The save file.
Now, before we talk about the games, we should probably talk about the shows. Don't worry, this isn't going to be a video on the history of game shows. Although I'd watch the hell out of that. But anyway, the Save Files is about my memories. So in this case, we're going to be talking about how I got hooked on game shows from a very young age. And I do mean very young. My parents and their friends love to remind me that not long after I learned to talk, I was constantly awarding them fabulous prizes like, "You've just won a brand new car!"
Oh yes, I watched a lot of game shows growing up. Something about the spectacle, the excitement, and the tension just grabbed me. Or it could have just been the excessive amount of pretty colors. I don't know, I was 4 years old, but the point is that I loved them from very early on. One of the first memories I have is falling down while playing outside and getting a fat lip. It was very painful and I cried a lot, but the babysitter brought me inside and put on an episode of Bullseye, and I calmed down in minutes. I loved them all. Tic-Tac-Dough, The Joker's Wild, Bullseye, The Price is Right, Card Sharks, Family Feud, Sale of the Century, Name That Tune, Chain Reaction, Let's Make a Deal, Remote Control, Bumper Stumpers, you name it. If it had money and prizes and contestants, I watched it. Some game shows took a while to grow on me. Jeopardy was a favorite of my father's, but I found it boring until I got older. The Newlywed Game was dumb to a child, but it got much more entertaining as an adult.
Your wife said you are a closet what?
Closet freak.
Closet freak. Hang on, Charlie. She said you're a...
Let me see.
And some game shows were so niche that you really had to seek them out on those weird channels that you rarely watched. And to this day, I remember shows like Super Pay Cards and Fandango that only get me blank looks when I talk about them with anyone else. And then there was the best of them all, Press Your Luck. It only ran for 4 years, but it had a huge impact on me. My favorite by far, the big board was amazing and a technical marvel at the time. People would slap a huge buzzer to stop a bouncing set of lights on a board of projected screens, hoping to land on huge sums of cash and prizes. But there was a bad guy.
I need a spin! Come on, I need a spin! No whammies, okay? Stop!
Stop it, oh whammy! Yeah.
The Whammy was a barely animated cartoon that would show up and take away all of the contestants' money. It was almost always extremely silly, but the fact of the matter is that this show combined two of my favorite things as a 4-year-old, game shows and cartoons. So naturally, I fell in love. Also, the Whammy is preceded by one of the greatest sound effects in the history of anything. I love that so much, I put it in other games, like getting a penalty in NHL 12. And of course, there's the host. Peter Tamarkin was a perfect fit for this show. He possessed manic energy, and he was quick with a joke as he was with a laugh. But where he really shined was controlling the pace of the game. If things started ramping up, so did he. Like any great commentator, he added to the excitement of the game by boosting it with his own. And he genuinely loved the contestants, which is a good thing, because a lot of their contestants were weird as balls. Take Beverly Peters, for example, who screamed constantly, and often screamed so hard she went cross-eyed.
Stop at 4,000 and a spin.
Or then there's Gene Snyder, who loved to point at the board and yell $80,000 at it.
Here we go. Who is the champ today? Preston Herlock. Stop it away! We'll be back right after this. Gene, let's talk about it. Congratulations.
The point is that I loved this show immensely, and would have given anything to be able to play it. Sadly, even though a PC game of it existed, I only ever found a copy of it once. It was bundled with 2 other Game Show games, and I couldn't convince my dad to buy it for me. I did get my hands on a few games, mostly by GameTech, and this is sadly still the only way I know of to play one of my old favorites, Wipeout. And there were also more than a few Game Show greats on home consoles. Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune can be found on practically every home console ever released, although the best versions of each were on the PlayStation 2. And The Weakest Link on PlayStation 1 is a pretty fun party game, but there were also a few stinkers. For example, what the hell does this have to do with the Game Show Funhouse? Aside from having J.D. Roth's pixelated mug grinning stupidly at you every now and then.
Fast forward to 1995 or 96. The internet had just arrived at our home, courtesy of America Online, and it isn't long before I use Webcrawler to search for Press Your Luck. And one of the links points to a Christian website run by a man named Kurt King. Now, I didn't quite understand what this had to do with a game show that I'd loved growing up, but curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked the link. And what happened next consumed my life for months.
Turns out Mr. King was also a game show fan and a skilled programmer, and he'd handmade his own version of a Press Your Luck game, and made it available for anyone to download for free. And it was awesome!
What's your pleasure?
I gotta go and press my luck.
In addition to painstakingly making the art as authentic as possible, he'd sampled audio clips of Peter Tomarken announcing the dollar values on the board, and as many of the whammies as he could get his hands on. It was, and is, a joy to play time and time again, alone versus the computer or with friends.
I love this game so much that at one point I plunked down $100 for a big red slapper button, just like the ones they used on the show. Only this can be plugged into any USB port and used as a joystick. Yes, I'm aware that I spent $100 on what is essentially just a one-button USB joystick, but it allows me to do things like this.
What's your pleasure?
I'm gonna try and catch her. Big bucks. All the bucks are on that board. $80,000. Big bucks. $80,000. No whammies. Whammies. Stay home. Stop. We're going. No lightning. Please let the lightning be behind the top right. Give me nothing but money and bullseyes. Now.
From there, my eyes were open to the world of the internet. And for once, I'm not talking about porn. Instead, I found more game show fans who decided to make game show games for a hobby. PackDude of PackDudeGames.com, also known as Corey Anatato, made tons of fun Flash Game Show games on his website, most of which are still there today. There was a wonderful site called Flash Game Shows, which had many quick bonus rounds that you could play, from classics like Tic-Tac-Dough to Bullseye. There was also Basic Games, where Ryan Morris used Interplay's Learn to Program Basic to painstakingly recreate dozens of game shows in admittedly low resolution, but nobody can doubt his animation skills. And then there was Big John. Big John was possibly the most well-known and the most prolific of the fans making free game show games. He made many full games, many of them being the best available version of that particular game. In my opinion, Big John made the best versions of Deal or No Deal, Wheel of Fortune, and The Price is Right, all full games with great touches that kept the experience authentic to the show and exciting as hell. Wheel of Fortune even allowed you to submit your own puzzles to the database, allowing its players to extend the game indefinitely. And The Price is Right allowed you to play just like the TV show, in any of its incarnations, and it contained virtually every pricing game that ever showed up on the show. And it also had a single-player tournament mode that started you off with one pricing game and allowed you to unlock more simply by playing games and increasing your winnings. For a Price is Right fan, it was addicting, and you wound up playing for ages just to unlock one more game. And considering there were about 90 of them, you'd be playing for a while.
And that was as good as it got, really. Some truly outstanding homemade games that anyone could play. Aside from only one exception that I can think of, everyone gave these games away for free. Aside from not owning the rights to the shows, they simply wanted to share their love of game shows with as many people as they could. And a lot of people got a lot of joy out of these games. I know I did. But sadly, it simply couldn't last forever.
I'm not 100% certain that it happened exactly this way. It's a lot of guesswork, and I'm working from a foggy memory to begin with, but after Millionaire got mega popular, they decided to work with Jellyvision, the makers of You Don't Know Jack. That'll be a topic for another time. And released 3 popular home PC versions of Millionaire. I don't know how successful they were, but I bought all 3 of them. And I think that the rights holders to a lot of these game shows saw that there was profit to be made, especially Fremantle Media. Enter game development company Ludia. They worked with Fremantle to create official licensed versions of Press Your Luck, The Price is Right, Family Feud, and many more. And the games they made were okay, I guess, but they just weren't complete. The Press Your Luck theme is bizarrely missing from their version, and replaced with the worst remix ever. And Peter Tamarkin had sadly passed away before the game was made, so they got somebody else to voice the host, and he mindlessly reminds you that you've just given an answer.
Okay, this is your answer.
The light bounces around the board randomly, but they couldn't be bothered to program it so it didn't pick the same square twice. So often, the lights will just stop moving for a second or so. Ludia's version of The Price is Right was more accurate to the show, even using the same announcer to describe the prizes, and was even pretty fun. But it only included a selection of pricing games, and most of the unlocks were video clips of bloopers from the show. It was all a bit soulless compared to the fan-made versions, but casual fans of the shows probably would never notice the difference. And then Fremantle turned into Dismantle. They started sending out cease and desist letters to all the fans making game show games for fun, and games started disappearing off the net in droves. FlashGameshows.com is now practically completely dead, though thankfully I managed to save most of the original Flash games to a hard drive before they were pulled. Some of Big John's games were pulled, and the rest hung around for a while, but the box.net server they were on has been down for a while, and they haven't been replaced. The only game I think PackDude got hit for was Deal or No Deal, and humorously, instead of pulling it, he replaced it with a very similar game, Meal or No Meal.
You know, a more cynical person might leap to the conclusion that Fremantle and Sony saw that these fan games were way better than their commercially produced products and wanted to shut down the competition. But I don't think that way. I'm serious. They have a right to protect their intellectual property. This does not stop them from being giant poop heads.
After a while, the damage was done. The amount of fan-made games released on the net dwindled down to practically nothing. The few good ones I found after that were buried deep in internet forums. It's a terrible shame because we were starting to get PC versions of some really niche games, like the short-lived Jimmy Kimmel game show Set for Life.
In any event, the deed was done, and the heyday of homemade game show games was over. It's a complete shame because it was a wonderful time to be a fan of game shows. You could play virtually any of your favorite game shows anytime you wanted. But what I'll remember most isn't a particular game, or a game maker, or even Fremantle's BS. No, what I'll remember most about game show games is how they inspired me to learn programming and make my own games.
It started with Greed. Greed was one of my favorite big money game shows back in the 2000s, but nobody was making a game of it, official or otherwise. I'd been tooling around with RPG Maker 2000, and I was only halfway decent at making RPGs, and I realized that the system could support trivia questions, so I made my own Greed game. It was very simple. At the outset, it included a mere 8 questions, a full set needed to play the whole game. The last edition I made had 10 sets, so it had a little more replayability. Sadly, that version is long gone. I removed it from my website because Big John's superior version of Greed had come out by then, and it never occurred to me that I might want to keep it. I decided from that point that it would be more fun and less legally questionable to invent my own game shows and make games out of these. This is Lockout, a slot machine game show bonus round where the idea is to accumulate $10,000 on the slot wheels before they're all locked up. I originally programmed this in RM2K, but later upgraded it to Dark Basic. And when I did, I added little bonus games where you could play for a car if you made it to a lifetime total of $250,000, $500,000, $750,000, or $1 million. But I admit it's a bit tedious to play all the way to those milestones. This is Take Your Pick, a very simple 2-player luck-based game with an actual front game and a bonus round. 2 players take turns picking boxes from a board of 25, trying to collect a W, I, and N card to spell win. There is 1 instant win space, prizes and cash spaces on the board as well. The winner goes on to the bonus round where they try to collect $5,000 or the win space before finding one of 3 lose squares. Pack Dude asked if he could make a version of Take Your Pick for his website, and I was thrilled. He's way better at Flash than I am, and his version is technically superior, though I'm partial to my color scheme. Then there's Climb to the Top, a simple luck-based bonus round where you stop the bouncing light on the screens, hoping to avoid a surprise, trying to get to the very top screen, which holds amounts of $10,000, $15,000, or $25,000. Finally, there's Straight Sevens. This was my favorite. A kind of a combination of game show ideas with what I thought was an interesting hook. 1 player does timed rounds of trivia, but the player isn't told whether they get questions right or wrong. Once time has run out, the player can see if they've gotten 7 correct in the time allotted, or stop and take home a fraction of the money. If they've made 7, they win the full amount and go on to the next round. And the time limit gets smaller, but the money multiplies up to 7 times. If the player successfully completes 5 rounds, they could win over $800,000. It would have been $1 million, but humorously, RPG Maker 2000 couldn't handle variables over 999,999. And like Climb to the Top, this game never got an upgrade to Dark Basic. I've done very little in the way of game making since then, however. But every now and then I'll get that urge to start playing game show games again. And I'm grateful that I've managed to hang on to so many of these fan-made treasures, since they still bring me a lot of joy. but I can't help getting pissed at Fremantle whenever I see a cool new game show on TV that I'd love to play. Because odds are, nobody's tried to make a homemade version of it thanks to those turd burglars.
One more thing. That guy Pack Dude I was talking about, he actually went on a game show. He took the chase for one of the largest amounts yet won on that show. He writes for Buzzerblog, which is a great game show news site. You should check it out if you love game shows like I do. In any event, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe. But for now, I've got more memories to make.